Greetings, everyone. My name is Matimba Mkansi, the author of two great books. Think Black, Act Black, which I published in 2017. This is a book which talks about the psychology of self-reliance. So it touches on how we can develop the mentality of self-reliance, which begins, of course, with believing in yourself, accepting yourself as you are, as a black person. Of course, this is within the context of history, because if you know our history, it is a history which, in the process, found us feeling dehumanized, feeling unworthy. So I touch on some of the aspects which are affected by our history of oppression in terms of our character as black people. So psychology of self-reliance. And then the author of the curriculum of Black Excellence, which I published last year in 2021. So on this book, I talk about decolonization of the mind. Here we go deeper, into decolonizing the mind and into developing an innovative capacity, as black people. So also it's within the context of our history as a people. I'm passionate about where we come from because it determines if we think right and we analyze our past correctly, well, maybe not correctly, but analyze our past critically, then we can be best suited to think about our future. So in this context of the curriculum of Black Excellence, I focus on the decolonization of the mind and improving our innovative capacity. Because without innovation, we'll keep on repeating our past. But with innovation, we get to be creative, in the economic space, social space, political space, in all the spaces of our life. We become more creative. So that is what, more or less, the curriculum of Black Excellence is all about. Decolonization of the mind, developing our innovative capacity. But today, I don't want to talk about decolonization, or maybe I'll touch on it. I want to talk about freedom, as today's Freedom Day here in South Africa. The beauty of our freedom, in South Africa, is that it comes with the freedom of expression. So what that means is I do not have to be a freedom fighter or, involved in politics to be able to have a say on matters that affect us as a people. I've got a right to express myself. So I come in here to exercise that right, to test it, to see if it's functional. I come in as a young black author, as a young visionary, as a young academic, to try to interrogate this freedom and how it relates to me and how it relates to other young thinkers out there, young innovators, young hustlers out there. In particular, I want to talk about a concept I call soft freedom. So if we're going to talk about soft freedom, it means we also have to understand it within the context of a hard freedom. So hard freedom vs soft freedom. What do I mean by soft freedom? What do I mean by hard freedom? I steal this concept from the concept of hard law vs soft law. When we talk of hard law, we're talking about the law which can be enforced by the courts. This is normally binding law. This is normally the laws that govern nations and societies. Whereas when you talk about soft law, we are talking about more or less guidelines and recommendations, and this normally occur at an international level where perhaps, let's say, there's a conversation about climate change, this conversation involving various nations, and then they come up with recommendations to nations, or perhaps in order to fight the challenges that we are facing as far as climate change is concerned, we should do this and that. That is those are guidelines, those are recommendations, they are not binding. That is soft law. The concept of hard freedom vs soft freedom, it's also inspired or comes from, or I stole the concept from the concept of hard science vs soft science. When we talk of hard science, we are talking about the laws that are governing the universe, the mathematics, the physics, the chemistry. Those are laws that are unquestionable. They are there. Those are big laws. Whereas when you talk about, soft science, we are talking about science that involve perhaps the human emotion. We are zooming in now, the human emotion, the human psychology, human interaction, generally social sciences. We are talking about, when we talk about that, we are talking about soft science. So you see, hard law, soft law, hard science, soft science. And then now that's where I come in with the concept of hard freedom and soft freedom. When we talk of hard freedom, we are talking about the freedom that is attached to systems, or freedom that is at a national level. We talk of political freedom, which is what we are celebrating on the 27th of April here in South Africa. Political freedom. It comes because a lot of people, black people in particular, were oppressed at the national level. Not just that one person or that one person, but collectively were oppressed. And then in fighting for freedom, we fought holistically, we fought against the system. It's hard freedom in that it is attached to an entire system, it's attached to a national system, it's big freedom. We talk of economic freedom. It's not freedom of one person becoming a billionaire. It's a freedom of the collective becoming economically free. So that is hard freedom. So like I said earlier, I want to focus on the soft freedom. What do I mean by soft freedom? We are talking about the kind of freedom which is not necessarily at the national level, but has an impact to national systems. This is freedoms that we as individuals, as black people, we can govern in our own personal capacity. Freedom that we need before we can even think about the freedom at the national level. So these are the soft freedoms. Freedom from what exactly? Because we understand that when we talk of national freedom, which is hard freedom, we're talking about freedom from oppression. When we're talking about economic freedom, we understand what that means. We're talking about hopefully owning the means of production so that we can be able to be to take care of ourselves economically. It's up there. What do we mean by soft freedom? What are we freeing ourselves from? And why is it important? And why is it necessary that on this day of Freedom Day, we should also think about these soft freedoms? It's freedoms that are small, like self-doubt. Freedom from self-doubt. Have we ever thought about those kind of freedoms? Freedom of innovation. I'm looking down here because I wrote them down so that I don't miss them. Freedom of innovation at an individual or personal level. Freedom of the mind, which is partly touched on in decolonization. I talk about that in the book in chapter 3, decolonization of the mind. Decolonization of the mind, re-establishing a sense of internal worth. I talk about that. We are talking about freedom of beauty, of expression, not expression like I'm doing now, but beauty, expressing yourself in terms of being black and being bold and being fearless. Are we focusing on those small freedoms? They are very important because they're the building block of the hard freedoms. How is it important? Like, what do I mean when I say the soft freedoms are actually the building blocks of high freedom? I'll give you examples, 3 examples. When our elder, our senior, Robert Sobukwe, was leading the march back in the days. He had to, he couldn't do it alone, of course. He had to work with other people, and they were protesting against a very brutal government of apartheid. You know, these are people who are non-nonsense takers, you know, people who put a boot on your neck like you are not human. You know, these are ruthless people who not only at an individual level but at a system level, they've developed systems that keep us as black people oppressed and subject. And there is a man, Sobukwe, who is well respected in the black conscious community, organizing a march to challenge this regime. You know, even though he was preparing, or he was actually planning this march to fight against a brutal system, days leading to the march, he realized that some of the people were scared. You know, some of the people were not confident about the odds of them making an impact. Do you know what he did in order to get the people to be bold, to actually say, you know what, we are going there tomorrow. We are not going there to fight. We're not going to throw stones. We're going to be peaceful, but we're going there. Do you know what he had to do in order to help them develop the courage that was needed to fight for the hard freedom? He focused on the soft freedoms. If you read Mutsoko Peko's, Honorable, is our senior, the author of The Land is Ours. So there are two books which have the same title. The Land is Ours by Advocate Mugaitobi, but I'm not talking about that book. I'm talking about The Land is Ours by Mutsoko Peko, published in the 1980s. He outlines there what occurred leading to the day of the march. It was political education to help the average black person understand the value of freedom. So these are the soft freedoms that they had to achieve at a personal level before they can have the courage to go at the national level and fight for the hard freedom. Freedom of the mind. That is example number one, how the small soft freedoms of the individual become the building block of the hard freedoms of the collective whole. That's one example. The second example, which occurred earlier on, which I have to mention because I love the man behind it. I will consider him my role model, in fact. Booker T. Washington. The Booker T. Washington wrote the book Up from Slavery. So I've mentioned before that when the slaves were released from the plantations, most of them didn't have a concept of freedom. Most of them didn't even value freedom because they didn't understand it. They didn't value education because they didn't see a need for it. They spent years focusing on hard labor and being abused and being tormented and being subjects of the brutal systems that of the time of slavery. So here is a man, Booker T. Washington. He was also a slave. He was born into slavery and he was freed when he was a teenager. I think 13 years there, 9 or 13, I don't remember. And he was lucky enough to find education. And when I say education, I don't mean formal education. I'm talking about, knowledge that empowers. You can find that outside school. And he realized that in order for the collective whole to embrace their freedom, they needed to achieve something. They needed to be free at the personal level. Small freedoms. And he went on to educate the slaves about that value of freedom at the personal level before we can talk about the freedom at the collective level. He went through the same process, which is similar to what Sobukwe went through, similar to what Marcus Garvey went through, similar to what Thomas Sankara went through when he was educating people about the value of a revolution. We start at the interpersonal freedom. things that you, as an individual, you can do at a personal level. Things that you can do to affect change. You know, if eventually all of us do these things, we can collectively bring about change. The last example of the importance of focusing on soft freedoms before you focus on the hard freedoms is the most recent one. During Fees Must Fall, you know, Fees Must Fall, Roads Must Fall, that movement, from those movements from 2015, they were challenging the hard, they were fighting for the hard freedoms of Fees Must Fall, decolonization. These are collective issues. These are issues that affect the national systems, in this case, the system of education. But before we could get there, you know, there were guys like us who were in the engineering space, in the art sciences, and we thought that, you know, what are these BA students doing? You know, what are they doing? They like attention. We didn't understand, some of us, we didn't understand the need for all that commotion. And it was through the focus of small freedoms that were presented to us in the form of political lectures, when we standing by and realize, or no, man, it makes sense at this level. This is something that I relate to. This is something that I can do. This is something I can contribute towards. Therefore, it is only then that we're able to understand the importance of the hard freedom, you know. So we came on board. You know, it was only then when you began to understand why the police was shooting at you for doing nothing, for being student or for fighting for free education. It was only then you were able to understand why, to conceptualize the behavior of certain academics within the systems towards the black students. You know, without the understanding of the soft information, you cannot understand the bigger picture, or at the system level. So because of soft freedoms, there were those who were fortunate enough to understand it, and there were those who were in the fringes of what was happening, who were absorbed in by first understanding the importance of soft freedoms, and then they understood, and then they started to get involved in the fight for hard freedom. I hope I've covered the literature, or the background, you know. So with that understanding, hopefully, which I've put across, difficult as they may be, these concepts, I hope that we do not feel the pressure as young black people to wanna be directly politically involved. You know, politics, as much as they say it's important, but some people are not cut out for politics, you know, but they are cut out for other areas which contribute towards collective progress. As we celebrate Freedom Day, let us understand the value of small freedoms. Let us grow in our own personal capacity. You know, before we can even talk of economic freedom at your personal level, understand financial freedom at a personal level. Before we can talk of owning the means of production at a personal level, understanding the value of innovation. You see, do you see how these soft freedoms are linked to the big freedoms? Before we can focus on being proud as a people, you know, collectively, you know, when you see the next black person, first let's focus on the small freedom of being proud in ourselves, in our design that the God gave us. As we celebrate Freedom Day, remember that yes, we might have won the big freedom of politics, but there's many more freedoms that we're still fighting for. And most of them, the building block is within our control, is within a space that we can, at a personal level, influence. So that being said, happy Freedom Day.